Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be testing out some of these paints here, and I have this little pack of pastel watercolors that, surprise surprise, I got from Kmart. I have unofficially made it my mission to test as many art supplies from Kmart as I can, just because they are a more affordable art supply and I'm just very curious to see what they're like. I found a few hidden gems and also a few not so great art supplies from Kmart. So let's test out these pastel watercolors and see which end of the spectrum they are. So they come in these little 12mm tubes here, and they also include a 21mm of white watercolor paint, and I'm not exactly sure what that is because watercolors are usually transparent, and white watercolor just makes me think of gouache. Personally, I just feel a little bit skeptical of pastel watercolor sets because honestly, with regular watercolor sets, you can get pastel tones just by adding a very small amount of it to water. But let's swatch these out and see how they look anyways. And anyways, first impressions with these, they're definitely light and pastel, very soft colors, but they do feel a lot like gouache paints, especially the gouache paints from Kmart that I recently tested. I'm getting some pretty strong deja vu from them, which can't be a bad thing, honestly. I kind of liked the gouache paints from Kmart anyways. And here is my little swatch of these pastel paints. I tried to mix a bit of water with them to sort of get like a more watercolory effect, but if I paint them on thicker, they definitely do look a lot more like gouache than watercolor. But honestly, that can't be too much of a bad thing. I do enjoy painting with gouache paints a lot. And let's start off with a little painting here, and I actually decided I wanted to do a little bit of a castle scene. The pastel colors definitely gave me the feelings and reminded me of you know, when like a sky has all sorts of like soft clouds in it with like pinks and like oranges and yellows when it's like during sunset. That's the kind of sky that I wanted to see if I could do with these paints, and I started off with just a little bit of water sprayed onto my watercolor paper here, and as you can see I also have my little castle masked out, and I just used some masking film for that. And I started off with a very small amount of the paint mixing into the water that I had originally sprayed onto the paper. I wanted to see how dilute I could get these paints and how well that they would cover with a small amount of paint mixed with water, because that's usually what you do with watercolor paint. Honestly though, I did find being pastels, obviously they were going to be less saturated in colors. So as I was building up colors and like details into the sky, I felt like I needed to use more paint than I usually would with a normal watercolor paint. Next up, I'm moving on to the castle here, and since we are a little bit limited with colors, I decided to go with the pastel aesthetic on the castle as well, and I started off with a soft sort of dilute layer of a light pink, and I just laid a few shadows here and there on the castle, but this is mainly going to be the underpainting, and over the top I decided to do some more details. Now with the details, as you can see, I'm doing lots of little spots all over this castle, and this is going to hopefully look more like a cobblestone sort of pattern for these like, you know, the makeup of this castle. And I'm doing it with a few different colors and a few different size little spots as well. As you can see, I've mixed a sort of bluish purple color, and I have also mixed a slightly more pinkish purple color, and I'm really trying my best to get the darkest that I can with these paints, but since they are opaque watercolors, which I just find a little bit strange, I can't get as deep shadows as I want. But that being said, these are definitely pastels and they are definitely living up to the name of pastel. I can't really complain too much, especially with that pink here. I honestly really do like the colors, especially this pink. I think it's just really nice and pretty, and I feel like to get more bright colors, you kind of have to paint with it a little bit more thick than you would a regular watercolor. So I kind of feel like these are definitely closer to gouache than they are watercolor. That being said though, they are pretty cute paints. So as you can see, I've added in some pink here on the roofs of these towers, as well as on the trim of some areas on this castle. And now I'm moving in and just adding a slightly more pinky, sort of purpley color with just really tiny little dots in between. And now I've just blended it a little bit with a little bit of blue here, just to try and get a little bit more detail and just a little bit more definition on the castle. I'm trying to make it look interesting. After this, I kind of wanted to go in and add in a little bit of detail with these sort of greenish and teal paints, and I'm just going in with definitely more concentrated here, and I'm just painting over some little leaf details which are going to be in the foreground. And you can definitely tell when I do this here that these paints are quite opaque, and yeah, definitely feels a lot like gouache, but if you are used to that kind of thing, I guess that is good. If I was painting this with regular watercolors, I probably wouldn't have been able to add in those little leaf details unless I switched to something else like gouache or paint. After this, I felt like I did all I could with these paints, but I still wanted to add a little bit of detail and just define some of the shapes here and there, because these are definitely pastel paints. I still wanted to get a little bit of a shadow here and there and just outlines, so I decided to do that with my black Prismacolor Premier pencil, and I just added some little outlines here on the castle just to define all of the towers and stuff like that. And then I actually, after that, I went in to the sky and I decided to draw in the silhouette of a dragon. It just felt like the perfect opportunity to add in more of a fantasy element to this, because we have some lovely little pastel colors and a castle which feel really sort of fantasy, and a dragon flying in the sky as a silhouette with that sort of really warm yellows and pinks, just I think suits really well. The pencil layered over the paints really well, which is something that I definitely expected for a watercolor or a gouache type. And I was also able to add in a little bit of shading with the black pencil as well, just to get a little bit more texture and just add a little bit more grit to this like castle, to make it look a little bit more realistic and a little bit less cartoony. I also decided to add in some extra little details here, like the windows, which I am adding into some of the towers and buildings. I think that just makes the castle look a lot better, as well as some little lines around the edges of the pointy part of the castle roofs. Little details like that are really going to help to make your artwork just look a little bit more polished, especially when you add little things like slight shading or texture beneath areas which might cast a shadow, as you can see, as well as subtle textures below the windows, which really help to add, like, to draw your eyes up to those windows. And I think using the pencil really helped to add just a little bit more to this painting that I felt like the pastel paints were lacking a little bit. Overall though, I found these paints quite interesting. They're definitely more towards gouache than watercolor, but what would you expect from pastel watercolors that were around $3 anyways? This was a really fun little challenge and I had an interesting time. I found these paints pretty cute, and if you picked up the gouache paints from Kmart, these definitely would help to complement them and just add a few extra colors. And I honestly think the gouache and these would probably work pretty well together to get a more of a complete palette. Anyways, here is my final results. I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this. I definitely had a lot of fun. My favorite part was definitely the dragon. I am a sucker for dragons, but I really enjoyed using these colors as well, and I think the castle turned out pretty cool. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit that like and subscribe button to get your scribble fix in the future, and comment below what you think of my art and what you think I should test out next for art supplies. Hope you're all having a lovely day. Please stay safe out there, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye everyone.